Shalom and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. This video is specifically a message to Israeli citizens and to Jews worldwide. What I'd like to do here is to show you the uncanny similarities between my situation documented on the Homeless Consultant channel and the situation that Israeli citizens are currently in their homeland. I do this with an emphasis on the point that Israel is currently under siege by forces of evil, and so am I. To give you just the briefest summary of what I'm talking about, let me explain. I moved to Minnesota 10 years ago. And everything went okay to the extent that it did for about 6 years. But after a certain point, new neighbors started moving in, and they began to terrorize and torment me to such a degree that I was totally incapacitated inside my own home. The authorities in Minnesota, from my landlord all the way up to the governor's office, did absolutely nothing to help me. And in fact, they would just blame the victim and defend the perpetrators. Now, because of this, because I was so incapacitated, that helped to contribute to me losing my job. And when you have a perfect storm of events like that, that means that I was thrust into this environment of just terror and torture and torment 24 hours a day while I was in a desperate situation. The point of this is that I ended up becoming homeless as a result of this, as a result of the total negligence of this state government. Now, since then, that was 2 years ago, since then, the main reason I have remained homeless and have not been able to recover is once again because of the total negligence, incompetence, and corruption of this state government. You might say the evil of this government. But not only that, it's the people of Minnesota at large. They have not helped one bit, and in fact what they've done is they've sat back and they've just watched me die. And I am so close right now to that point where I am in fact preparing to die right now. So one reason I'm telling you these similarities is in the hope that you, of all people in the world, will actually understand what I'm talking about and what I have been through. And maybe, just maybe, some of you out there will help me out. If you want details on what happened to me, you can watch my videos on the Homeless Consultant channel. This documents what amounts to the negligent homicide of this homeless person by the state of Minnesota. So now, with that very, very, very brief summary, let me explain the similarities to you. And I think if you know what's going on in Israel, I'm sure Minnesotans listening to this, largely, they can't even find Israel or even Asia on a map. I doubt they're going to understand a word I'm saying, but I'm not speaking to them this time. So the first thing is that I was literally terrorized by my neighbors inside my own home until I became incapacitated inside my own home. And that, of course, is analogous to what is going on inside Israel. Next, these neighbors who terrorized me moved in long after I did. I was there first. And yet, these latecomers came in and they felt like they owned the place, to such a point that they could even try to drive me out of my own home. That, of course, is analogous to what the Palestinians are doing. Next, my landlord and the government authorities in Minnesota consistently blamed the victim and defended the perpetrators without even the beginnings of attempting a competent investigation. They blamed the victim and they defended the perpetrators. And uniformly, they suggested that the solution to this problem was that I move away. Not the people who moved in and caused all the trouble, but that I bear the full burden of time, effort, and expense to move away from my own home. And this, of course, is analogous to the way that the United Nations treats Israel. Also, in the manner that the United Nations treats Israel, I am heavily criticized whenever I point out the negligence, incompetence, corruption, hypocrisy, and sheer inhumanity that I have experienced among the Minnesota state government, social services, and the Minnesota church. They consistently blame the victim. They criticize me whenever I point out what they are doing that is so clearly morally reprehensible. And that's exactly, again, what the United Nations does to Israel. Hopefully you already see the incredible similarities here. Next, I went to more than 100 Minnesota churches, Christian churches, for help, because biblically they are obligated to help, and more importantly, if they're truly saved according to the Christian religion, they will feel a natural, not just a desire to help, but a joyful, overflowing, joyful desire to directly help people in need, especially brothers and sisters. That's what's supposed to happen. But instead, the church in Minnesota is so delusional and so apostate that it refuses to help me at all. And yet it actually believes that it is serving God when it puts my life at imminent risk by neglecting me in that manner. The church's words are always very peaceful and benevolent, but its actions are deadly. And to be honest, they appear to be demonically motivated. I think all of you understand what the analogy is here. If that isn't a description of the way that Islam treats Israel, then what is? In Minnesota, the authorities insist that the only solution to my homelessness, now that I am homeless, is that I repeatedly commit perjury, which is a felony. That is dangerous to me legally, and it threatens my eternal soul in defiance of God's commandments not to lie. That's something we share in common, the 10 Commandments. Every legal form, from employment applications, tax forms, automobile registrations, voter registrations, just about anything that I would have to fill out, has a disclaimer at the bottom that says, under penalty of perjury, a felony, I certify that all information is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. And of course the problem is, now that the state has made me homeless, I have no permanent resident address. And about the second question on every legal form after my name is, what is your permanent resident address? I can't fill out those forms without committing perjury, which is a felony. And yet, even state employees and government officials tell me to just put in any old address in there. They are encouraging me to commit a felony. And the consequences of that will be absolutely catastrophic, if not in this world, in terms of the legal ramifications of willfully committing perjury, a felony, then what about my eternal destination if I willfully violate God's commandment not to lie? Now, the analogy there are the proposed two-state solutions, land for peace solutions, which threaten the security and the defensibility of Israel. Those are bad solutions. They threaten the existence of Israel. Next, as a homeless person, I am instinctively feared, hated, and loathed by mindless simpletons who don't even know anything about the homeless. I experience that kind of discrimination and just nasty looks, just foul temper toward me the moment anybody learns that I'm homeless. I even hear people's voices start to shake after I tell them that I'm homeless. Before I tell them I'm homeless, they're just fine. They're normal. After I tell them I'm homeless, I'll hear their voices shake. I experienced that 2 days ago at a church here. That's how much they just fear and loathe and hate and don't want anything to do with the homeless. The analogy here is more than obvious. It's the same thing as anti-Semitism. It's the same thing as any mindless racism. In my videos, you'll see that I call it osteirophobia, the fear of those who lack an estate. Next, homelessness is being criminalized in order to exterminate the homeless through fines, jail time, economic sanctions, and state-sponsored negligent homicide of the homeless in Minnesota. They're not in Minnesota, but in another state that's also doing this. One homeless man received, I believe it was $114,000 in fines for committing the crime of existing in public. That's the movement I'm seeing toward here in Minnesota. And in any event, I can't function in this state without breaking the law. That, of course, is analogous to the BDS movements: boycott, divest, sanctions. Next, when I attempted to find a stable place to sleep in my car, because I'm stuck living in my car in a Minnesota winter, an Arctic Minnesota winter. In fact, this is my second Arctic Minnesota winter I've slept in this car. When I attempted to find a stable place where I could sleep peacefully, and while I was there, I attempted to improve the conditions of that place for everyone. It happened to be a grocery store parking lot, a grocery store chain that was owned by a Minnesota company. And while I was there, I tried to improve the place for everybody's comfort, the customers, the employees. For example, I went to management and told them about a drug dealer who was operating out there. Things like that, crimes that were going on in their parking lot, obstacles that presented a danger. I did a lot of cleaning up, moving obstacles so nobody would get hurt in this place. And what happened when I went in and told the management about that drug dealer and these other problems? They called the police and told me to get out of there. Not the drug dealer, not the prostitutes, not the little gangs of thugs who were trying to break into cars. They told me to get out of there. That's the way that Cub Foods handled this, a Minnesota grocery store chain. I moved in there looking for a stable place to sleep in peace, and while I was there, I attempted to improve the conditions for everyone. Obviously, that is analogous to the settlements in Israel. I am receiving a death sentence for a crime that I refused to commit. I will not commit perjury willingly. I did nothing wrong, and I fought to avoid breaking any law. I have fought hard to avoid breaking any law. And yet, I responded to all these attacks and injustices as required by moral law and self-defense. So, as I was trying not to break the law, as I was trying to do the right thing in every single instance to the best of my ability, I was attacked left and right by the very people I went to for help, and, of course, the very people who made me homeless in the first place. And when that happened, I would raise the issue in self-defense. This, of course, is analogous to Israel's right to defend itself, for which it is constantly criticized and makes no rational sense whatsoever. Israel is a sovereign nation. It has every right to defend itself, and so do I. But in Minnesota, I'm punished for defending myself. My former website is now down because I could not afford to renew it. It was called Minnesota, and it described how I became homeless in great detail. It documented everything. Paper, audio, it documented everything. Proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the state of Minnesota made me homeless. It's negligence, it's incompetence, it's corruption. On that website, I had a logo, and the logo was of a silhouette of a person offering their hand in friendship, but holding a knife behind their back with the other hand. All of the talk from Minnesota government and the homeless advocates, and frankly just the general population out here in Minnesota, all of that talk, has proven to be nothing more than a deceptive Trojan horse. In fact, I lost everything I've worked my entire life for. Starting to work at age 13, I lost everything I worked for. And I did not use credit cards. I have not had a credit card in 20 years. I worked to earn all of that. And I lost every single bit of it except for the car that I'm living in and recording this audio in. The reason I lost all of that by attrition over the last 2 years is because I kept listening to all this talk from Minnesota government, social services, nonprofit organizations, church members, and Minnesotans in general, all of whom just lie through their teeth. Deceptive Trojan horses. I wasted all my resources waiting for even one Minnesotan to do the job that they accept a paycheck for doing. And it never happened. This, of course, is analogous to the way that all of the peace talks with the Palestinians are insincere. They can say peace, peace, peace all they want to, but then they go to their own radio stations and their own publications and their own speeches, and all they say is death to Israel, death to America. The real goal they have in mind is to eradicate Israel from the map and to exterminate the Jews. There's a difference, a disconnect between their words and their actions. The same thing I've experienced in Minnesota. Likewise, Minnesota exterminates the homeless off camera. I talk about that all the time on this channel. I demonstrate it. As a matter of unspoken policy, Minnesota's response to the homeless problem is a final solution: to exterminate the homeless off camera by, number one, ignoring, neglecting, and intimidating the homeless until they move to some other jurisdiction and become someone else's problem, or, number two, by ignoring and neglecting the homeless until they simply die off camera. And sadly, the analogy here is also all too clear. That is quite reminiscent of the Holocaust, the genocide, and calls for extermination of the Jews, such as, "We will wipe Israel off the face of the earth and push all of the Jews into the sea." I'm sure you are quite familiar with those kinds of statements. That's the kind of thing I've had to endure in Minnesota. But they say it in those benevolent, peaceful terms, just like the people who want to destroy Israel do. Next, the mortality rate for homeless Minnesotans is ridiculously high. According to survey statistics, there are 10,000 homeless people in Minnesota. There's actually a lot more than that. When I ask how many homeless people die each year, I'm told hundreds. Now, if I assume that they mean the minimum, 200, since it's plural, if I assume the minimum of 200 homeless people dying in Minnesota each year out of 10,000, that means that 1 out of 50 homeless people dies each year in Minnesota. Minnesota has 5 million people, so the mortality rate among the homeless is equivalent to 100,000 Minnesotans in the general population dying each year. But in reality, fewer than half of that die each year. About 42,000 die. So the mortality rate is more than twice among the homeless than it is among the general population. The analogy here is that in Israel, for such a small population, the number of its people who are attacked and slaughtered, particularly by terrorists, is way off-scale high for just about any country in the world. I can't imagine any country in the world that suffers such a loss as Israel does from that kind of viciousness. Next, in Minnesota, homeless people are looked upon and described as filthy. The recent Palestinian uprising began when Abbas accused Israelis of desecrating Muslim holy sites with their, quote, filthy feet. I don't even need to spell out the analogy there. It's the same word, filthy. That's the way homeless are viewed in Minnesota. That's the way Israelis are viewed by all those people who don't like them for no good reason. Next, lying about where money is spent. In Minnesota, there are, who can even tell the way it's wasted? Millions, billions of dollars budgeted for the poor and the homeless, yet it does not go toward the poor and the homeless. It goes towards salaries and facilities and such for organizations and agencies that supposedly administer help to the poor and the homeless. But that money doesn't go into the pockets of the poor and the homeless. A small token amount does. The analogy here is that the Palestinian Authority spends about 10% of its budget paying families of martyrs who attack Israeli citizens. So they beg for money around the world, and when they receive that money, what do they do with it? They use it to finance terrorism against Israelis. They don't use it for the purpose they say it's going to be used for. Next, the Minnesotans who are exterminating me perpetuate an utterly absurd myth called Minnesota nice or Minnesota friendly, which is craziness for a state that exterminates the homeless off camera. It has nothing to do with reality. It's a myth. And there's a reason why Minnesota is the only state in the country that came up with some kind of a myth like that to try to convince everybody of just how friendly and generous and charitable they are. Whereas other states don't come up with a myth, they just are friendly and generous and charitable. The analogy here is that Muslims perpetuate another utterly absurd myth that has nothing to do with reality, specifically the myth that Islam is a religion of peace. Those are the similarities that I could just think of off the top of my head. As I've gone through this, I have really come to empathize and sympathize with the people of Israel. Being blamed for your own persecution, or for your own terror, for being terrorized by other people, being blamed for it. Having the mass media refuse to cover the reality of the situation, and instead, if the media says anything at all, they look for something that you're doing wrong, instead of looking for a systemic problem. These are the kinds of things that Israel has to deal with. And my hope is that from this, you will be able to sympathize and empathize with my situation. Because, folks, I'm dying. I am being killed. I am being murdered by the state of Minnesota. I have lost absolutely everything, and it's illegal for me to earn my own income in the state of Minnesota without committing perjury, a felony. So I'm going to ask you, please, if this touches your heart at all, please do what Minnesotans have never done, and send a little something to my PayPal address at the end of this video. For all the work I've done on these videos, not just these videos, but the website that preceded it, which you can't see right now. For 2 years, I have fought this battle so hard, and I've received 0 donations. If you understand what I'm going through, the way I understand what Israel's going through, will you please consider helping to save my life and helping to get me away from this terroristic portal to hell called Minnesota? I want to know what it's like to live in peace among good and decent people again. I don't want to die at the hands of these vicious savages in Minnesota. Please, help me. Please. The last thing I'd like to say is that if there are any Israeli authorities watching, I will entertain the idea of political asylum in Israel, because the state of Minnesota is, in fact, murdering me. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I am being killed. I will die if I don't get help soon. I will entertain political asylum in Israel if you're willing to offer it, and if there's any feasible way for me to get anywhere near the place when I can't even get to the border to step outside of this state. I am suffering capital punishment for a crime that I refuse to commit, and for no other reason. If political asylum is feasible, I will accept it as the only means of saving my life. Please, all of you watching out there, consider sending a donation or pursuing the asylum option if there's any way anyone can help me. I don't want to die in this place, not among these savages. Please help me. Nobody has helped me in all these years I've begged for help. That's all I have to say. I thank you very much for watching, and may God bless and protect Israel.